a minute past 5 o'clock. It appears we have a quorum. I'll call the TC meeting for January 27th, 2021 to order. Joe, if you could please read the instructions for the group.
Welcome to our virtual meeting. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. All panelists, that is alders, commission members, and staff, have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. Commission members, please continue to use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the body, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joe. Before we get started with the meeting, just a procedural issue. Ken Street was not able to join us this evening as he has a family commitment. So just in case I would get knocked off of Zoom, normally Ken would just step in and chair the meeting until hopefully I'd be able to get back into the meeting. Is there anyone who'd be willing to agree to serve as a temporary chair just in case I get dropped off the meeting unexpectedly? Bill, would you be willing to? You used to be vice chair.
Sure.
Okay. Does anybody have any objection to Bill Bremer serving as a temporary chair if I fall off the meeting? If so, please raise your hand. Okay, hopefully that won't happen, but if so, Joe will make you a co-chair and make it so that you're able to control the meeting. Hopefully I won't get kicked off and we'll be fine. So thank you very much, Bill. Okay, did everybody have an opportunity to look at the minutes from last time?
How about a roll call?
Oh, I'm sorry, Patrick. I ran right past that. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Nasra O'Haley.
Here.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Chris McCahill.
Here.
Ann Kovich.
Here.
Denise Jess.
Here.
Bill Bremer.
Here.
Bridget Brown.
Here.
What I noticed.
And there is Harold.
Here.
And we know Ken is gone, so that's everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Did everybody have a chance to look at the minutes?
I'll make a motion for approval.
Okay, it's a motion by Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote in favor. Unless anybody chooses to oppose, please raise your hand if so. Okay, the motion is carried. All right. Any public comment, Patrick? And Joe, I don't think we had anybody registered, did we?
No.
Okay. Any disclosures and recusals this evening?
Ann,
Yes.
I may have to on item number 4, the high injury network. The top slab is involved with that project. And since I work for the top slab, I'm not directly involved with that project at this point, but just in fact that I'm not sure. I don't think I have to recuse, but.
Why don't you just, to me, that sounds like a disclosure, Harold. That sounds like similar situation that you had that you talked with John Strange about. So I would say we'll just note that you disclosed that you work with the top slab.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, it's just a presentation and we're not taking any action this evening anyway.
Okay.
But it's fine to make that disclosure. If it's always good to let people know.
Okay.
So thank you for that, Bill. Anybody else? Okay. All right, item number 2, Yang, I don't know if you have any comments on this. Normally we would have this on a consent, on the consent agenda, but we didn't actually have anything else for a consent agenda this evening. So do you have any comments, or do we want to just ask for questions, Yang?
Rene and I are here mostly for questions. But if needed, I can ask Rene to give a maybe really brief summary of what the item is.
I had an opportunity to read it and had no questions. Do people, does anyone want a presentation on this fairly routine item? We're happy to do it if you'd like. Yeah, I
I'd like
don't
to see
see.
the presentation.
You would? Okay, go ahead, Renee.
Sure. So this is just the annual contract for a grant that we get from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation that supports work that we do around pedestrian bicycle safety. The biggest item in there is actually funds the staff position that we have. Some of you, though not all of you, have met our pedestrian and bicycle outreach specialist, Pepe Barros, who does fill that position, and he does a lot of different kinds of campaigns. He works very closely with the school district. Normally, we would be doing a lot of sort of in-person pedestrian and bicycle education, but he has really shifted to trying to do some things virtually, assistance with walking school buses, which we hope will be rolling with again if school restarts. We do some things around light campaigns at night, share the path campaigns, just pretty much a pretty wide variety of things to really promote walking and biking safely. He also works a lot particularly with our community schools, but also with a lot of our community centers, really trying to increase the reach that we have within a diverse group of people within the city. He is a main partner with a coalition in town called Just Bikes that works a lot on bike equity issues. So really an important component of our team in building relationships and trying to improve safety outcomes for walking and biking, particularly with children, but with people of all ages throughout the city. So that's a very quick scenario of what he does. But this is the contract that is that grant money that allows us to do that work.
Okay, thank you, Renee. Any questions for Renee? Okay, we'll need a motion.
I'll make a motion for approval.
Pardon me, Nazra has a question.
Okay.
Thanks, Renee, for the presentation. My question is the 169,000, does it go to overall many communities in terms of training, or are there just the school district?
Sure, most of that money does pay just for the salary and various supplies to do things, but he does work throughout the community. He really tries to make a lot of relationships so that we can serve not just schools, but the community in general, and hence a lot of different community organizations. He has relationships with to do programming throughout the city, as well as community centers. I mean, really, we try to do outreach and build those relationships so that it isn't just the same few schools over time. And we really tried to expand beyond that. A lot of work we do is with the 4 community schools when school is in session, but we do try to provide assistance to all the schools as much as we possibly can, with a little extra focus on those particular schools.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and is there any breakdown of the budget, like how many hours are spent in those communities, or are there those community identified particularly, the names of those communities?
So they're not identified particularly, and that definitely has been shifting over time to be a lot more focused with different organizations, but I wouldn't say that we have a breakdown of hours, and particularly since he started, we've been in the pandemic a lot of that time. So the work has really shifted from, like, he had a pretty big array of commitments from organizations to work with them, but they were all reworked under the pandemic to just trying to offer virtual support more so, and then doing some more distanced kind of activities.
Thank you.
Yang, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, so Renee, if you remember on top of your head, can you maybe give Alder Haley some idea about the, what's the percentage of the different tasks? When we hire currently carbon, we redid the position description, so that can maybe give Alder Haley some idea on what person does.
Sure. So, I mean, still, I would say over 50% of the position is working with youth. That is a big focus of this grant. And that traditionally does happen in schools, but we have probably expanded, maybe 25% more to summer programming or after school programming with community centers or groups like Centro Hispano, different groups like that we've been able to build some relationships with, and definitely some of the like at Warner Park, definitely trying to expand some programming that obviously stopped as well with that with it closing, but now it's reopening. Very big relationship with community groups in the Leopold neighborhood to do after school programming. But then we did increase just the, probably to around 25% or more, trying to work with adults and doing more community-based rides that are helping everyone become more comfortable with riding. And then we have campaigns that are very particular, like working on Bike Week. We started doing more walk promotion events, as well as our light campaigns, which this year we ran in cooperation with the South Madison Library, because we weren't able to be out doing direct action with people and getting lights to people who need them. So that's probably another 25% is those various campaigns, including some work around sharing the path, because we've seen a lot of issues there recently. So, but I would say 50% is still just youth education.
Any other questions? Was that all you had, Nazra?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions for Renee and Yang? Okay, could we have a motion to approve, please?
I'll make a motion for approval.
Okay, there's a motion from Bill. Is there a second? Harold? Second from Harold. Okay. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote in favor unless anyone is opposed. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands, motion carried. For item number 3, Metro Transit's not quite ready for this item on approval of bus pads to be constructed in 2021. So we need a motion to refer this item to the March 10th, 2021 meeting. Harold?
Move for referral.
Okay, there's a motion by Harold. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, seeing no hands, we'll assume a unanimous consent vote in favor unless anyone's opposed. If so, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands, the motion is carried. Okay, item number 4 on the high injury network review and feedback. My understanding was this was discussed at the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, and Grant, I think you and others had indicated that TC input was requested on this item. So Yang, am I right on that, Grant? Yes?
Yeah, I can give a brief background on this, and
Okay.
then ask 2 other team members, Ellie and Relay, to talk about the details. You're right, and the staff team has been working under the guidance of TPVB developing the Vision Zero program, specifically the action plan. There are many components of that. So we have been bringing to TPBB when we were there last time for the high injury network. Yeah, one feedback is that it probably be worthwhile to get some, so for us to keep the TC informed and get some input from the members here. We think that makes a lot of sense, especially we're looking to bring a list of 2021 Vision Zero project to the body in the near future. So the high injury network really should and can be a important factor to be considered, as a body considering those projects, and also general, for safety improvement purposes. That's one of the responsibilities of the commission. But Anne is correct that TPBB is a lead agency on this. So after we get the feedback from the group, we'll bring those to TPBB and get more guidance from them for the next step. So with that, I'll pass on to Ali and Renee.
All right, so I am going to just share the presentation. So I just thought I would start a little bit. Many of you have heard about Vision Zero probably on quite a few occasions, but I know that people on the commission have kind of joined at various times. So basically, this really short, it's just a strategy to eliminate traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safe, healthy, equitable mobility for all. This is just a map that shows the other official Vision Zero cities, which we are in the process of becoming as well. Vision Zero is a little bit different than what traditionally traffic safety did, where it just expected that there's a certain inevitability to deaths and serious injuries, and talked a lot about just sort of every kind of crash equally, regardless of the outcome of that crash. And Vision Zero is very different in that it's focused on the fact that deaths and serious injuries are preventable, that you have to take into account that people are not perfect. And the focus is really on life-changing injuries. Yes, we would like to avoid crashes of all types, but this program says we just want to really hone in on those ones that are going to impact people's lives forever from happening. If you just have some collision or crash and it's, maybe your bike gets a dent in it, but you get up and are perfectly fine and it doesn't change your life other than going to the bike shop, that's not what we're focused on. It also takes a look at the whole operation of the system, and it says that it's not expensive to save lives, that it's really a key component of what we should be doing. So that's a very, very quick rundown to kind of set the stage for talking about the high injury network and what it is. So when we're talking about the high injury network, we're talking about the city streets where the majority of these severe and fatal crashes are occurring. Obviously, there are crashes throughout the city, but as you'll see, the ones that are really these life-changing crashes that we're talking about with Vision Zero are happening in fairly definable places. So this really helps set the stage so we understand where those streets are. Typically, they include severe and fatal crashes. It definitely is for all modes. You'll see that with pedestrian and bicycle crashes, sometimes it goes beyond just the severe and fatal crashes, since there's a sort of a fine line with those. And it helps identify where we should be making these investments, where the needs are the greatest. It also, as you will see as we move forward with Vision Zero, will really help inform all of the implementation strategies. But I think for the Transportation Commission, you see projects of all kinds. And you're going to hear the high injury network mentioned, possibly if there's a reconstruction, someone may mention that it's on the high injury network. If there's a resurfacing, different projects like that, you're going to hear about the high injury network, even if we're not specifically coming to you to talk about Vision Zero. I think this is something that's going to get talked about more with all of our projects as we consider what are the right improvements to make, whether it's a resurfacing, a reconstruction. I know the Traffic Calming Subcommittee has talked about the high injury network on a number of occasions and how that fits into their work. So this is something that you're just going to hear about a lot more going forward as we develop an action plan to eliminate those serious and fatal crashes by 2030. Now, the high injury network, it's something that's recommended by what's called the Vision Zero network. That is the one that keeps the list of all the official cities. They recommend that everybody develop and adopt a high injury network to help really focus the resources. They feel that it really helps identify those places where crashes are occurring and helps you sort of grapple with why that is. It's also a great way to get more departments on board and collaborate on this, because this isn't something that just traffic engineering does or just engineering does. It's really something that is everyone in the city needs to play their part. And it helps, there's only so much funding, and it helps make those priority choices and put it where it's needed the most. And I think it really helps people understand why you're doing something on one street versus another. Obviously, in our department and others, we hear about traffic concerns throughout the city. And I'm sure that, people will come to this board and also share concerns that they have. And they may wonder, well, why did you put an investment here instead of there? And this is one way to really help everyone understand why these choices are being made. So then I just wanted to run through a few examples to kind of help understand like how the high injury network is done in different cities. This is in Boston, and they developed, different ones, ped, bike, and motor vehicle, which they then combined into, on the right-hand side, their full high crash network. Now, this is their sort of second, more, polished approach. Their first year of doing Vision Zero, they actually had a map, and it kind of just had these big blobs on it for each of the modes, as they tried to figure out how do they really want to look at this issue, what kind of crashes, how do they want to consider the different modes. This is what they decided to do, but it started out very inelegantly as they studied it further to come up with more of a long-term solution. This is Austin. They also created different mode or different sort of streets, with the motor vehicle being the fatal and serious, but then for bicycles, pedestrians, as well as motorcycles, because they have a high number of motorcycle crashes in Austin. They added in moderate injury crashes for those modes, and then combined them into this one single multimodal network. And like Boston, this isn't their first iteration. Their first iteration was sort of long lines that were fatter in spaces in certain places, as they figured out how exactly they wanted to define this in the long term going forward as a part of their larger Vision Zero action plan. So this is Ann Arbor. I actually don't know. I have never seen if they had an iteration before this, but they just released this at the end of last year, and they have sort of decided to do corridors and then intersections separately to kind of address that question that comes up when maybe you have a corridor that's not seeing a lot of crashes, but you have a particular intersection that is really the place where the crashes are occurring. So they came up with having two sort of different ways of looking at it. Now, Columbus, they have also broken it out by different kinds of modes, including motorcycles in Columbus as well. And what they did is they had crash per half mile segment. So sort of density of crashes per half mile segment. And that's why you see the yellow turn into the brighter red, where the highest number of crashes are on that particular corridor. But as you can see, like they did not include the whole corridor. If it didn't have high crashes, they're not contiguous lines in all instances. And in Eugene, it's a little bit different. When they combined the motor vehicle with the pedestrian bicycle, they included the whole corridor, and regardless of if the whole corridor had that same density of crashes or not. And then they just said in their action plan that they would consider that when that corridor was up for improvements, the different contexts, but that they were going to put the entire street on the high injury network. So there's definitely a lot of variety in the way that this is approached. Now I'm going to turn it over to Allie, who's going to talk a little bit more about kind of what all these crashes mean and some of those details that you would have seen.
Yeah, so I'm going to go through some things that a lot of high injury networks include. And one thing is the KABCO injury severity scale. We use this scale in our high injury network, and this scale is a way to report injury severity at the scene of a crash. So if K represents fatal crashes, represents serious injury crashes, B will represent minor injury crashes, C represents possible injury crashes, and O represents no apparent injury crashes. So this is an example, and the table we used, or one of the tables we used, or data that we used for our high injury network. Here is a 5-year total for motor vehicle crashes, bicycle crashes, and ped crashes, as well as a 5-year average. As you can see, we have the K level crashes for the 5-year total and the 5-year average, which is fatal crashes. And then A is the serious injury crashes, and those were the numbers. And then B was the minor injury crashes, and then C was the possible injury crashes, and then O was no crash or no injury crashes. So these were some of the numbers. Selecting crash severity for the high injury network. As you can see, what Renee pointed out with other cities, that there's no national, international standard for developing a high injury network. A lot of high injury networks definitely vary, and depending on the data, what each city wants to include in a high injury network, if they want to, weigh ped and bike crashes differently. But high injury networks altogether are, kind of for one single goal, and that is to pinpoint the networks, corridors, intersections that in the city that have the highest fatal and serious crashes. Walking and biking crashes may be a small sample size if only include fatal and serious crashes. And some common methodology considerations for the high injury networks are some high injury networks will just include K and A level crashes, which are fatal and serious injury crashes only. Some will include B crashes for all modes. Some will include B for just ped and bike crashes only. Some will also include any crash for ped and bicycle crashes. So some will, weigh ped and bicycle crashes a lot more than vehicle crashes to really pinpoint those. And some high injury networks will do a tiered system. So for example, one tier is just the K and A fatal serious crashes. And then the other tier will represent the ped and bike crashes along with the K and A crashes. In some high injury networks, intersections sometimes are ranked separately from roadway segments. So, should we go back to that one?
Oh, sorry. There we go.
And so high injury networks are relatively new instruments cities use to reach their Vision Zero goals. It just helps pinpoint what projects Vision Zero will implement and really focus what corridors, intersections that Vision Zero is really going to spend the money on. So it's important for cities to really pinpoint, where they really want to spend their efforts on. Some other considerations are walking and biking crashes may be a small sample size if only include fatal and serious crashes. The difference between a serious and minor injury outcome for a pet and bike crash may be slight, and people may not realize the severity of the injury at the time it happened. Including less serious crashes gives an additional information about the crash propensity of locations with a low number of serious fatal crashes. High number of minor injuries in a location may indicate a problem that should be addressed. And on the next two slides, I'll be showing the maps that we are considering for our high injury network. It's a work in progress, of course, and we're still, nitpicking it and really, finalizing it. But these are the two maps that we have right now. So map 1 will show the lower severity crashes that were filtered out, and will show the K and A level crashes, which are fatal and serious crashes only. And then for map 2, we are also including a bicycle and pedestrian B level crashes, and that's tier 2. So that will show the K and A level crashes, as well as a second tier that will include the bike and ped lower severity crashes as well. The example high injury network maps were derived by using a hotspot method. And this was done by mapping all crashes on city maintained streets using GIS software. And clusters of these crashes were then linked together using best judgment to create the high injury network. If you want a more in-depth explanation how we got those hotspots and whatnot, please ask questions afterwards. This is the example 1 map that I was talking about, and this only shows the K and A level crashes for the high injury network, which is illustrated in the red line. On here also is the minor injury bike, ped, and motor vehicle crashes as well, but those were not included on the high injury network that you see in red. And then the second one is here that you see is also includes the tier 2, which is the yellow gold line. And that also, or that tier also includes the minor ped and bike crashes. And so you can see it includes a lot more corridor streets and intersections on top of just the K and A level crashes, like the network that you see in red. So it just gives you 2 options to see. And, including those, extra ped and bike crashes really adds a lot of streets to the corridor and the high injury network. So this is another example to the high injury network that we have.
All right, so what we're doing is we're in the process of trying to kind of finalize a high injury network map. And one of the things, after going to the TPPB and talking about this and then talking about it some more internally, we realized that what we really want is a very clear criteria that, or a definition for the high injury network that we can explain to people, they can understand how we got to it. We want to reduce that subjectivity so that it's clear why street is on or off. And we want to make it easy to replicate every year. We do want to put this in our annual crash report, which I know that you see here at this committee. And we want to be able to do it in the same way each year. And what we've learned through this process is that GIS system, that software that we use to map things, it's not as easy to use. It has polygons of different shapes for different segments. It's not sort of broken up easily by blocks so that you can kind of link everything together simply. And then looking at what some of the other cities did, a lot of them had help from the outside to really help refine that and make sure that their criteria was clear. And they had something that was defensible when they created that high injury network map, since they would be using it to really inform projects going forward into the future. So with that in mind, we thought we would reach out and use some of our contacts to see how we could get some help to really make this the best possible product that we feel really confident in using going forward. And so we met with, you heard about the TOPS lab, which is the Transportation Operations and Safety Lab. They do a lot of different research projects and are really just a great resource that we're lucky to have here being a university city. And so we are working with them. We met with them. We gave them the feedback that we got from the TPPB, kind of shared with them information about other cities and how they're approaching this, and asked them to assist us potentially with this project. And so they're putting together a proposal based on the information that we shared about what we've done so far with the high injury network and kind of the challenges that we were coming up against with our sort of data that we have in-house that we can work with easily, so that they can come up with a proposal that would help us meet that first part, the clear criteria or definition that is reduced in its subjectivity and that we can replicate each year, both in our reports for Vision Zero, but also in our annual crash report. And so that's, we have not gotten that back from them. We've just been sort of working with them to help craft that. But we thought in the meantime, since you guys are going to hear about the high injury network quite a bit as projects move forward, it would be a great opportunity to get some feedback and see if there's anything in the various ways that the other communities have done it or that we talked about that really resonated with you, and have that feedback from this committee as well.
Okay, that's a lot of great information. So who has comments or questions? Harold, go ahead, you're first.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Lots of good stuff in there. I guess maybe I'm missing something, but I mean, I'm kind of wondering what the idea is of thinking about this in a network and corridor way. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about when we talk about the network and connectivity, if we talk about how people get to places, but when it comes to crashes and fixing places where those crashes occur, this idea of the corridor and the network makes less sense to me, because I mean, you know, you have all this great data of like intersections where crashes happen, but I mean, what's the point of fixing the block one block over if there are no safety issues there? And the only way this does seem to make sense to me is if you think about it like, oh yeah, we're going to reconstruct East Wash and therefore we're going to fix the whole thing. But for the vast majority of these high injury hotspots, that's not going to be the approach that's going to be taken, I would assume, because I mean, we're not going to reconstruct a whole street just because it's part of the high injury network. So if somebody could enlighten me what the idea of the corridors is, and I mean, you know, looking at the map, I think the second version of the map that includes the bike crashes had, for example, Pleasant View Road, the whole corridor in it, but there were actually like 1 or 2 crashes, and that's like however many miles. So that I think kind of reinforces the point of like, why do we think about this in terms of corridors and the network?
Who wants to take that?
That's a great question. Yeah, I can give a try, and then I'm sure that Renee and Ellie probably has better answers as well. This discussion actually came up at the previous TPP meeting as well, and I think because of that, you know, our approach handles it. You know, for draft right now, it's a little bit different from many other cities. We have you know, lines on there creating a network, but we also dots kind of representing the intersections. Yeah, you know, from our review of what other cities are doing, I think the idea is trying to kind of create a continuous corridor. So when you plan projects, you know, make improvements to all the maybe the key points, key intersections along the whole corridor, instead of just improve like one intersection here, another intersection there. I think that's probably the reasoning behind that. But I think you're right. I think typically the intersections are the most danger points, has, you know, all different kinds of conflicts. That tend to be the hot spots for crashes, especially the more severe type of crashes. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's why kind of we kept the dots on there for now. I'm wondering if Renee and Eddie, you have other thoughts on this?
Sure. And I mean, I think one way to think about it is that there are like, okay, so intersection improvements, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't say, because this corridor is on the high injury network, that it wouldn't be considered for reconstruction in the long term as you kind of think about projects. So if there are ones where it truly is a corridor, then it probably should be on there for that type of consideration, as well as, you know, Pleasant View, like maybe isn't the right one to have the whole corridor on there, but other streets that could be different. So I think that's why some cities approach it differently, and some just say, well, we're going to put the whole corridor on and then look at those corridors closely for which areas need the most improvements. That's sort of the model that Eugene took, versus just showing like little tiny dots all over. So.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally sure. Oh, and I see Tom has his hand up. Maybe he wants to.
Yeah, Tom, if you want to go ahead and address that point, go. And then Grant, I realize you're next, but if Tom has something on this point, go ahead, Tom.
I'm just going to compliment your powers of observation, Harold. We have to check because Pleasant View Road actually might have gotten included, not because of the B crashes associated with bikes, but also some of the B crashes associated with cars. That was under construction for a while, and so I think there were a lot of B crashes that involved autos. And I just sent an email for us to circle back and just check that out. So so it was a good point and a good observation. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just quickly respond. I mean, you know, Pleasant View or whatever. I mean, that was maybe not so much my point. And I'm really thinking about this in Vision Zero terms. I mean, there's good reasons to think about streets as corridors and making improvements to them. But if the goal is to eliminate fatal and serious injuries, then maybe that makes less sense. Where, like, you know, there's crashes related to left turns at an intersection. So improving the rest of the blocks probably doesn't do much. Maybe it does because you can lower speeds, which then reduces the injury severity. But yeah, I mean, I think we have to be careful to, I mean, we chose Vision Zero as a framework intentionally, which doesn't mean we can't do other things, but really, if we have that one goal, then thinking about how we can best get to that, I think we have to keep that in mind. Thanks.
Yeah, we can definitely share that point with TPPB, you know, and you know, UW team as well, if they end up having us. Great point.
Grant, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I basically did raise this point at TPPB, and you know, to your question earlier, Anne, I think we are. I recommended at that meeting that when we had a final proposed high injury network, that it comes to Transportation Commission, and that the commission should be the body that's reviewing and approving that, and that this is the body that would really be using that information to drive prioritization, et cetera. I didn't recommend that this conversation come here because I mean, we are essentially having the same conversation we had at TPPB. And so, I mean, that's fine. We'll get some extra feedback, but I think it's just we need to be careful to be, I mean, the question around setting our policy and defining how we're going to define the high injury network is an active and open conversation at TPPB, and we're waiting for follow-up from staff. We actually don't even have this on our next TPPB agenda because we were told that we're not ready to get answers to some of the questions that we had. So just to frame that this is in essentially a repeat of a conversation that was had at TPPB. I raised those same points, Harold, and specifically saying, you know, if we take this corridor approach, then, well, if you have an intersection that's particularly deadly or dangerous, and it doesn't happen to, it's not next to another intersection, and it's not on the network, does that mean that it's not something where we're going to focus our energies? So in my mind, I think the point of doing a network, it almost feels more like a way to just report out and to say, 78% of our crashes happen on 30% of our roadways, right? Like we hear those numbers. I think we did a quick analysis on this first draft. And so it's like that's interesting to know. It's helpful to just frame that, but from actually using this to prioritize our work and to reduce these deadly and serious crashes, I agree with what Harold's saying. I think the corridor aspect of it is not really very meaningful and could lead us in the wrong direction. I think it makes sense to look where there are hotspots that are connected perhaps on a corridor to inform projects. I actually do hope that we can move towards taking on a reconstruction project to address safety and not just waiting for it to come up in the the pavement's finally bad enough where we can do it. So I think we can use the data to do a corridor intervention, but I think it would be more useful if we look more at the locations, at the spots, and not try and push them into a corridor model, into a network model, because I think we run the risk of leaving important spots out and perhaps putting focus on areas where we're not actually seeing the deadly and serious crashes. So thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Coincidentally, Tom Wilson had just emailed me like at 4:59 or 5 o'clock saying, why is this wondering why it was at TC when it was basically the same presentation that was at TPPB. And normally I know we try not to duplicate, but I think, Yang had an excellent point, and I was willing to have us have this discussion so that we can be aware of exactly what the high injury network is. As Yang and Renee and Allie said, we're going to be hearing about it as we have these discussions, as staff comes to us and talks about stuff. So I think since not everybody is always willing or able to participate in the policy board meetings as well, that it's good for us to hear about it. And, it's great to have that clarification, and I appreciate that. And, if you believe that the Transportation Commission is actually going to make the decision on the high injury network, is that what I heard you say was your recommendation? Then I think it's really good for us to hear about this now. And
No, sorry, the TPPB needs to make a decision on what is our policy and how is our network going to be, and then that's what Transportation Commission is going to be working with. So that's where we're at right now, is we haven't defined that. We're waiting for more information to come back from staff.
Right, but I'm sorry, perhaps I wasn't as clear in what I meant, that since the TC is going to be using the high injury network and making a lot of their decisions, that it makes sense for them to have feedback in the decision-making process, understanding that the policy board makes a recommendation to the council with regard to what it is. So anyway, from my point of view, I don't think it was a waste of our time. I think it was it's a good discussion to have. I do have a couple of questions or comments myself, but certainly want to make sure everybody else has their opportunity first before I ask mine. Other comments or questions at this point? Okay, I'm just going to make an observation. You've all probably heard that I was a banker for over 40 years, so I sort of did a little analysis of the numbers looking at motor vehicle, bicycle, and pedestrian injuries, and it was just very eye-opening as the various cities talk about vulnerable users. When I did the numbers and looked at the percentage of the total, almost 77% of the motor vehicle crashes had no apparent injuries. Only 12% of the less than 12% of the bicycle crashes had no apparent injuries, and just under 6% of the pedestrian crashes had no apparent injuries. So the discussion that I saw and the very interesting ways that the different cities tried to reflect that in how they set up their high injury networks. My personal feedback is that I hope that we as a city take that into consideration. And as you look at those alternative maps, understanding that people who are on a bike or people who are pedestrians are more vulnerable. And we really need to take that into account as we're looking at safety in the city. So, I was glad to see an alternative that took more of the pedestrian and bicycle crashes into account. So I don't know others' thoughts about that, but it really, really struck me as hugely different in terms of the statistics. So I don't know, Yang or Renee or Allie, if you have any thoughts about that.
No, see, that's a great observation. Go ahead, Renee.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, obviously, anyone who's been walking or biking and been hit by a car, it doesn't take too much to have an injury. And it's also a very fine line between just a minor injury and something that's serious. It could be just, a few miles per hour of speed. So I think, we have been hearing that taking more of those crashes from pedestrians and bicycles into account, since they are more vulnerable and are more likely to, if they are hit, to have it be more serious. So that's definitely something that we've heard from others as well.
Yeah. Great. Other comments? Yang, did you have any other comments?
Yeah, I want to add that, sometimes outcome of a crash when a pedestrian or bicyclist are involved, it's just a pure luck. I think that 6% that you mentioned, all of those 6% could have a very different outcome. Even at a relatively low speed with a vehicle, just because the vehicle carried a lot of momentum and really can cause a lot of damages to someone does not have a protection as a vehicle. So that's why I think we should place a lot emphasis on pedestrians, bicyclists, and on other vulnerable users. I think that's also an equity issue, right? So I just want to see a great observation.
Okay, great. Are there any other comments on this? I will go back to the earlier comments and say that it is our goal not to have duplicate presentations at the Policy Board and the Transportation Commission, and we have tried on, where we have topics that are of interest of both groups to invite members to attend the other meeting when there are topics of interest, whether it's TC or TPPB. So, maybe Grant and Chris, in order to avoid duplication in the future, if, high injury network's going to be on the Policy Board agenda and it appears to be of interest to the Transportation Commission, we can let people know and they can either just observe, or if invited to participate, that would certainly be up to the Policy Board. But I recognize that, but since we weren't at that particular meeting, I appreciate the heads up, particularly since we're going to be having Vision Zero projects and other things come to us, as Yang mentioned. And, I think it's important for everybody on this commission to have the information to, make those decisions. So excellent presentation, a lot of good information, a great initiative from, my point of view. And, I certainly look forward to hearing more about it. Any other comments on this particular topic? Okay, thank you. Item number 5, this was something that was requested to be brought to the Transportation Commission. So Yang and Mark.
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, this is another new kind of initiative we're trying to bring to TC, at least on an annual basis. If after the first one today, this body feels this is a thing that we're doing, So we definitely want to continue to do this on at least an annual basis. But I have to thank Alder Foster for this. This actually comes up during our conversation about what things traffic engineering is responsible for, and what things that make sense for staff to bring to the commission, either guidance, asking for approval, or just for your information, so that when you are making decisions on many transportation related issues, you're better informed. So this particular item is about some major signing changes that we have done in the past year. Of course, traffic engineering probably did thousands of signs last year, probably more. But there are a small number of signs that are critical, such as the stop signs, yield signs, and speed limit signs, things like that. So we just want to bring a list to the commission and keep you informed, and also maybe get guidance on in the future. What do we need to pay attention to as we take on future work? So with that, I'll ask Mark to talk about the list, and also talk about how we evaluate these requests and many other details. Mark.
All right. So, good evening, everyone. This list is just a list now of our new signing. It doesn't include the maintenance of knockdowns or leaning signs. It's just new stop signs, speed limit signs that we've installed just in 2020. I may have missed a couple, but I pulled out the data as best I could out of our database. But they're mostly in here, and there's a few. You can see the speed limit changes are quite. There's quite a lot of speed limit changes, and that's due to the Vision Zero efforts. And we typically don't do that many. And the stops with new construction, a lot of our new stops are new construction, and there are a few that we add stop signs to uncontrolled. Many of our intersections start out are uncontrolled. So as neighborhoods mature, we start adding stops, or conditions change, we go to two-way stops. But before I go through, I'll just read off a little information on how we evaluate the stop signs and yields. So we do install those, but it's only at traffic control, not every intersection, but when we do install stop or yield signs, we do it only after careful engineering survey indicates that the installation is appropriate. The main intention of stops and yields, their traffic control signs, is to really tell the driver who yields the right of way at an intersection. We don't like to, we're requested a lot to put them in for speed control purposes, but we don't like to do that. There are studies out there that show if you do add stops just for the purpose of speed control, they tend to upset the drivers and change their behavior, where they may speed up in the blocks that there aren't any stop signs. So our policy for installation of this traffic control signage uses the MUTCD for guidance and standards. When we evaluate the intersection for the appropriate traffic control, we look at the volumes for all modes. It includes peds and bikes. We look at the number and angle of the approaches. We look at the approach speeds and the sight distance from each approach, and then crashes. So any one of these factors or several together could cause our office to go ahead and install the traffic control. The guidance in the MTCD is pretty liberal, and so yes, I could say that why aren't there signs at every intersection? Well, we typically when we start out with new subdivisions in local neighborhoods, good sight distance, we don't install a traffic control unless we know a particular street is going to be a neighborhood collector or it fronts a busier street. But typically in small volume or low volume neighborhoods, you won't see signage, and that's because the MUTCD allows that, and also in our judgment, it's a way that it's not necessary, and it's also helps the driver to feel like they better pay attention to these intersections. But as driver behavior changes and neighborhoods mature and conditions change, we will go back and look at it and say, evaluate for adding stops or yields or whatever we need to do. So I guess that's my little spiel on our traffic control signage. And then on the list, so this list is just kind of puts together where we've added basically just yields or stops and speed limits. I guess I can foresee maybe a question I'll just address right now is if you see there are a couple stops where it's an existing all-way, which is kind of interesting for all-ways because everybody kind of expects there be some pretty good compliance at these, but there's a couple all-ways in town that the neighborhood feels that traffic is just either ignoring the stop sign or just blowing through it, whatever. So that's where you'll see we added some larger signs and maybe flags. So the purpose when we do that to an intersection, add flags, is just to remind the driver that there is something here that they should pay attention to, and hopefully get better compliance. So I guess I'll just open it up for any questions.
Go ahead.
Hi, so that was me. Yeah. Thanks. This is helpful. It's always good to learn piece by piece how things work. I think kind of raises some questions for me about what's going on behind the scenes. You know, those of us who have been on the commission for a minute have been through the neighborhood traffic calming conversations where neighbors recognize an issue. I guess theoretically it's supposed to be speeding conversations. It often turns out that there's other concerns about behavior at intersections and things. And as you mentioned, Mark, we're typically told in that setting that stop signs aren't effective traffic calming. So they get taken off the table pretty quickly in most cases. So how could someone from the city speak with a little more clarity about how these stop signs end up in the system? What is the trigger and the decision point that says, oh, this we do need a new control here?
Are you talking for just a typical two-way stop or single stop at for that? Or?
Yeah, anytime a stop is added at an existing intersection.
So Mark, you may talk about, I think, just two-way stop signs or single stop signs, and also, the warrants for all-way stop signs.
Yep. So it's important to split up the difference between the all-way and the two-way. So
hold on, before you get into that, I'm not talking necessarily about the warrants that say, whether, we could go through all intersections and check warrants on them, but how do these intersections come into the system? Who is like saying we've got a problem here that we might need to add something?
So we input comes either over the phone, through a direct email, or through the report a problem, or like you mentioned, through the traffic calming. If we get something through traffic calming, it goes over to the analysis for stop sign side of our office. So but I think the number one, or also we get feedback from neighborhood associations through the alder, or even neighborhood presidents representing a larger group of individuals. So that's, and I don't know if I can say that we get the greatest amount. I think it's kind of spread out from all those input areas equally. We get a lot of emails, we get a lot of requests from neighborhood associations, and we get a lot of just from individual citizens. And we just pool it all together, and we have reviews of each intersection and determine if it's appropriate for what they're asking for. And I would say most of the time for two-way stops or yields, we do go ahead and do that. Not every time, but a lot. It's based on our decision and our review that either behaviors changed, traffic volumes have changed, trees have gotten so big, houses have got built in lots that weren't there before, that that there was a reason, or a reason that the person was or felt that they need to contact the city about that location.
Thanks. Wasn't really the clarity I was hoping for. Maybe for, I think a couple folks here are on the traffic calming subgroup. Is this within the realm of that work?
We hadn't specifically talked about that, Chris, but I think that is a good way to redirect your question. Is we have requests coming into the city under lots of different sources, and they seem to be handled in different ways. And, that's one of the things that we're trying to resolve, I think, on the traffic calming subcommittee. So, I mean, this process of new speed limit stop and yield signing work seems to have its own path. Is that where you're headed with this, Chris?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so I can maybe provide a little bit information on that. Yeah, as Mark mentioned, that stop signs are not meant for speed control, but it does mean for a sign right away at the intersection more clearly if the situation warrants that. Yeah, I think Chris asked a really good question. We often got citizens coming to us, come to the commission, right, complaining about the speeding issues and other issues on their street, and they often request for a stop sign. And we often turn them down, telling them that stop sign is not meant for that, and let's look into other measures such as maybe speed humps, islands, and other things. But I think some of those actually end up, we end up putting stop signs on there. when we feel like, it does make sense. But for the most part, I think when people are asking that for speed control reasons, we typically tell them no. And but occasionally it makes sense, and we did install them. But I think the more intersection on the list does not come from that. It's more come from neighbors notice a problem at the intersection. If you're confused who has right away, and we review that and we install stop sign or yield sign. So I think that might help that a little bit. Also, I think quite a few on the list also are new constructions, and we kind of trying to identify the need for stop signs or yield signs proactively. If there is a T intersection, especially, and we know the main street is going to be have some heavy traffic, it makes sense for us to install stop signs right away. So hopefully that helps answer the question, Chris, you have.
Yeah, thanks. That does. I think I'll leave time. Maybe folks want to talk about specific things on the list or whatever, but it sounds like there's definitely an opportunity to, residents don't always know what they need when they ask for things, and that sends things down a certain path or another, and who knows what solution we get at. And so I think always an opportunity to sort these things out a little better. Thanks.
I made a note here to talk about this at our traffic calming subcommittee meeting, Chris. So I'll set this aside and bring it up when we have that discussion. So other comments or questions, either on the process or on specifics. Harold, go ahead.
Yeah, more comment on the process. I'm not totally decided whether I think this is a good venue to bring this to the commission, like every stop sign. I think, yeah, it is part of what we're doing and it can be important. And so having some sort of accountability is good. I think one easy improvement for these would be, instead of providing a list, would be to provide a map with them. Because especially for a lot of these like new construction streets that have like whatever winding way road that lots of us will have to Google each of them. So, I think having a map of them to get an understanding of like, oh yeah, right, this is a new subdivision, therefore we put this up, versus something else, that might be helpful for us to get a better understanding here. Thanks.
Okay, other comments or questions? Bill, go ahead.
Thanks, Sam. I'll just make the observation that other than roundabouts, we see very few yield signs and in Madison and frankly in Wisconsin. And I during my career, I've seen different parts of the country use yield signs more or less often. And I just make that as an observation. I don't have a problem with that, because I think not having a yield sign at say a three-way or a four-way legged intersection puts the responsibility on a driver, and I think that's good. I think that's appropriate. So the stop sign has a little different. It assigns right away, and that's very clear. Yield signs does the same thing, but I think it's our drivers are not used to yield signs, so it's more of a challenge. And I think I would like to see at some point in time in the future, it's not going to be in my lifetime, but that we won't need yield signs at roundabouts. We see use roundabout yield signs as an educational tool to explain to drivers you have to yield before you go into the roundabout. So, but I think, and I just make that as an observation regarding yield signs. I also see that when you go to four-way stop, all-way stop, that's just a precursor, and expect to see a traffic signal in the not too distant future if volumes continue to escalate or increase. That's going to be a sign. I guess I will have a question though of Mark and Yang as far as being proactive by the city of putting in stop signs. And do you look at crashes, neighborhood crashes, and have any, let's say, a trigger that if you've got 2 or 3 or whatever number that in a, let's say, a 2 or 3 year period, that you take a closer look and see if yourself, before somebody complains, that you actually think about putting a stop sign in. I'll let you answer that, I guess, as far as, you mentioned neighborhoods complain about it, or, somebody, a neighborhood board or something. But as far as being proactive of looking at crash maps and so forth from the city, as far as, but I agree that I think it is a good traffic potential for using stop signs as a countermeasure. So, okay, I'll stop there.
Well, yes, we do. Okay.
Okay.
I hadn't heard that, but I was hoping you would say that.
Okay, great. Is that all you had then, Bill? Okay, Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I might have a little bit different opinion on uncontrolled intersections. I mean, I like the theory that, in effect and legally, that means that, everybody has to yield to to the person to their right if they're getting there at the same time. In practice, I mean, quite honestly, I bet you a lot of drivers don't really even understand the yield rules at an uncontrolled intersection. And more importantly, have very much just become accustomed to, if there's not a stop or a yield sign and they're coming through an intersection, that they have the right of the way. So I think the concept that, well, legally it should be fine, it should take care of itself, doesn't give me a lot of confidence. And the idea that, like, well, if it's all unmarked, it'll provide some like beneficial confusion, so people like slow down and navigate it. Again, that doesn't seem like a great strategy with today's drivers. And also when people are going, if they were going 15 or 20 miles an hour, that would maybe be more realistic also. But even in our local neighborhoods, it's pretty common that people are driving 30 or 35 miles an hour. And to navigate an uncontrolled intersection where they're not even aware that the cross traffic doesn't have a stop or yield, and they're just assuming that they have the right of way. I think it is a challenging situation. I mean, my neighborhood has a number of these. I hear from residents, especially those with kids, that are really concerned about it. I mean, I remember teaching my kids to ride on the street. I shared this with staff recently on one request that came through. My kids have been riding their bikes since they were little. They've been riding, in the street with us, and then really on their own, probably by, when they were 11, 12 years old. And, I'm a pretty diligent parent and very aware about how transportation systems work. And I, have gone out of my way to really point out some of these uncontrolled intersections, say, hey, you have to be really careful with these because you never know, somebody could be flying through. And honestly, it's something that always, like, of all the things that I'd be worried about with them riding their bikes is getting hit by a car that flies through one of those uncontrolled intersections. So I just think that, as we're talking about Vision Zero, the concept of like putting the responsibility on the drivers, to me, is kind of the opposite of what Vision Zero tells us to do. And I think we need to be, I'm definitely in favor of, putting up a pair of yield signs at a four-way intersection, to at least give some substance to that, because I think there are some circumstances where uncontrolled is fine, but especially as neighborhoods get grown up, where there's trees and bushes and everything else, I think they are problematic. So it'd be an interesting conversation for us to maybe have at traffic calming and see if there's, if we can provide any guidance around where we might want to think about using traffic control, where they might be helpful, and hopefully not having to wait for a crash history to put them up. Thanks.
Okay, so I don't see any more hands up. Yang asked us a question at the beginning, and that was, do we want to see this on an annual basis? Because if we do, we should add it to our annual work plan. Chris, go ahead.
Oh, just answering that question that I think you posed. I think the short answer is yes. I mean, I think most of these don't raise any questions, but probably it's worth having the opportunity. And I'll echo Harold that if it was easy enough to put these on a map, that would make things much simpler to be able to scan for what we might need to talk about or look at a little closer.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think the list and the map would be really helpful so that we have, you know, we have something that we can look at to see how many we have and then specifically identify them on a map. Other thoughts? Are most people in agreement with, you know, the idea that we should see it on an annual basis? It seems like it would be a good plan. I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up from people. Yes? Bill, you have thoughts on it? Bridget? Nazra? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I don't think they should necessarily come, the traffic has to come to the TC before they put these up. I think it's good. It's good for information purposes, but I don't necessarily agree that we should be controlling the hands of Yang and Mark as far as whether they put one up or not. So I'll let them make the decision.
Okay, let me clarify. At this point, we're just talking about informational only, which is what
Correct.
we have
Correct.
tonight.
Yeah, and that's fine. I wouldn't want to go beyond that.
Okay, Bridget, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just agree with Bill. I think that what makes sense is, you know, if there's going to be any TC involvement, it would be in setting the policies that are used to determine in conjunction with warrants where different devices are going to be appropriate, but certainly not on a case-by-case basis. Although, you know, receiving the information as a FYI is certainly helpful.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have the conversation at the traffic calming subcommittee with regard to, you know, how this fits into that process. And we certainly are looking at evaluation criteria there. So perhaps continue this discussion there. Does that make sense? Grant, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say, my conversation with staff, I think we agreed that, yeah, the sort of as a regular practice that they wouldn't need to come here. We'd get sort of information like this, but that for any that would be anticipated to be more controversial or where it would be helpful to get that feedback or have an opportunity for public input or anything like that, that it would still be a venue for those. So just leaving that up to staff to decide, which ones those are, but just wanted to clarify. I think there could be certainly some examples, and we've had some in the past back with Pet Bike Motor Vehicle, and I think it can be a good venue to review some that are a little more controversial or complicated.
Okay, so at this point, it looks like info only, list and map on an annual basis. And I can certainly work with Yang and Mark to see, if this is the right time frame to do that. And ironically, we have our work plan coming up here, so that'll be one takeaway for adding to the work plan. Other comments on it? Okay, I don't see any more hands. Thank you very much. So we'll add it to our work plan on an annual basis, and we'll certainly continue the conversation about how the requests come in, et cetera, at the traffic calming subcommittee to see how that fits in with our work there as well. So very helpful. Thank you, Mark and Yang. Okay. Next, we have review of the TC work plan. I didn't suggest any modifications because the only technical one I saw was, one or two where a couple where we're pushing them from one quarter to the next. And that's just really a workload management thing that happens from time to time, so not really a change that I thought was important. We will certainly look to add the list of new stop, speed limit, stop and yield sign, and put that in as we just discussed. Other thoughts with regard to the work plan as you looked at it? And we do have on an annual basis in the next quarter, along with our TC handbook, an annual in-depth review of our work plan so that we can look at it and, make sure, like Metro Transit and the scheduling there, we made some changes this year in terms of how we looked at that because of the pandemic, and we'll have that discussion with Justin and the folks at Metro, what makes sense going forward in terms of the network redesign study, in terms of, BRT when that comes up. So we have an in-depth discussion on the work plan annually, but observations were made by commission members that we should look at it on a quarterly basis and just make sure that there wasn't something that we either wanted to add, mostly that we wanted to add, or changes that we might want to make. And in some cases, there were things that we deleted. So any comments on the work plan other than the addition we just discussed, which we'll look to make before the next meeting? No? Okay. I'll work on getting that done before the next meeting, touching base with Yang to make sure we get that timing right. Okay. In terms of update on the traffic calming subcommittee, we have very productive meetings at the subcommittee meetings. We spent a great deal of time during the last meeting talking about which current programs would be recommended for consolidation into the new program. And this discussion will continue at the next meeting once we obtain some additional information from staff. The two biggest considerations are the neighborhood traffic management program and the pedestrian bicycle enhancement program. We had discussions about safe routes to school, Vision Zero, and certainly some other questions about new projects under some of the other programs. We talked about a name, had some traction on one name, but I think we'll wait until we're final on that to announce that. We had started talking about evaluation ranking criteria, and that conversation is going to continue at the next meeting, along with some of the other things that we just discussed. We did have a discussion about format of the final report, just to make sure that we have it in the best format for bringing it forward to all the different venues. And the next meeting, I believe, we'll also talk about projects in the 2020 Ped Bike Enhancement Program. And I will also bring forward the discussion that we had tonight about new speed limit stop and yield signing, how those requests fit in with what we're talking about. I'll email Tom about that. Anybody else who's on the subcommittee have any other comments? Anybody have any questions? Okay. Next, announcements. Next meeting is February 10th. We still have 2 vacancies on the commission. I know the mayor's office continues to work on that. Everybody should have received an invitation to a lunch and learn from the MPO and the Capital Area Regional Planning Commission. I'm not sure how to say the acronym CARPC, so I'll just spell it out or say it the full name. So this is, how do they say it?
CARPC.
CARPC, thank you. All right. So we all love our acronyms. So MPO and CARPC, thank you. So this will be a really great opportunity. I'm looking forward to learning a little bit more about it. I know that Zia had, they had missed a few people the first time around. And so today I think there were some additional invitations that were sent out. So hopefully everybody has now received it. And again, hopefully everybody's able to attend because I think it's a really good opportunity for us to network and to learn learn a little bit more about those organizations. That was all I had. Was there any other announcements that I missed, Patrick, or anybody else? No. As you look at future agenda items, as you noticed, we had a light agenda last meeting and a light agenda this meeting. That was because we've had some items that we thought were going to be coming that got deferred forward. So I'm assuming that we'll have heavier agendas for the February meetings. In Legistar, there is a listing of tentative agenda items for the February 10th meeting, which does include that the public hearing, Metro public hearing, the traffic signal priority list, the final that's coming back, neighborhood traffic management program, potentially some other items, along with some public, at least one public works project, potentially our quarterly reports. And then we have a number of things already scheduled for February 24th and March 10th. So I've got some future TC meeting items on that as well. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that we attached was the action items from the last joint TC and TPPB meeting. It appears that March 24th is going to be the date for our next joint meeting. You should all have that on your calendar since that is a scheduled Transportation Commission meeting. And staff hold the policy board, and there is a quorum of the policy board available on that date. Works for Tom Wilson. So that's, at this point, that's what we're looking at. So we will have an agenda setting meeting and talk about these action items as well as the action items from our prior joint meeting. I also made a note on here to add the high injury network as a potential joint topic. That was Tom's suggestion that perhaps we may want to talk about that at a joint meeting. And Grant, I don't think Yang's still on. I don't know if anything will be ready by the 24th of March to, to have further discussions about it. If not, we can just use the method I talked about earlier, and that's comes to the policy board, and policy board feels that the Transportation Commission members should, give us notice, and we can certainly attend and either just, listen in or potentially participate if invited to do so. So I'll add that as a potential for a joint meeting. So I guess I would ask, does anybody have any other future agenda items for just the TC or suggestions for agenda items for the joint meeting that we don't have listed already? Because I will bring those forward to our agenda setting meeting if you do. Don't see any hands. If you think of something after the meeting, feel free to email me and please copy Patrick, and we'll certainly keep track of those. Which, I try hard to keep track of everything that we have going for our meetings or potential future meetings. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody. Again, a shorter meeting tonight. I need a motion to adjourn. Anybody? Bridget, got a motion?
Move Brown.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion and a second. I'm going to assume a unanimous consent vote unless anybody objects, which I highly doubt. So thanks everybody. Very much appreciate it. Take care. Bye.